Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. This week, we have the author of Carrasco, 67. We have Elaine Broun. Welcome to the show, Elaine.
Thank you so much.
All right. How you doing today?
Doing great, doing great.
Cool. All right, so tell us about, Carrasco 67. What inspired you to write about it?
Well, first of all, I had always been interested in writing from the time I was young. I just never realized that I would end up writing what I can reveal now was actually my own family story. And so originally, when we penned the story, I was still required to write under anonymity. And because of the grave topic at hand, because we were dealing with terrorists and those sorts of things, and they are scary people, and there are repercussions if you cross the line and you annoy them in a manner like exposing them.
Mm-hmm.
So my mother is the one that asked me, came to me and asked me if I would write it. So I thought about it, and I decided I would. So I just first of all, though, we had to convince my father to allow us to write it because we weren't allowed to discuss it in the family. It was very grave, the subject. When we lived in Uruguay, when we escaped, the military had instructed us that the minute we left, that we were not to talk about it amongst ourselves and with anyone. We'd had to act as if what we had lived through never occurred. And to backtrack, my father had it had come to him, or he was made aware that he had a terrorist that was infiltrated in his company. And so the company attorneys had asked him to let him work for a while because they wanted to garner a lot of information on him before setting up a sting to catch him through the police. So once they did that, what it did was it exposed him. And this Tupamaru terrorist, which was the name of the terrorist organization, he now had a face, he now had a name. And that was crucial, and that was where it put our family in the forefront. So it wasn't too long after that our family received a death sentence. And so, at first the police came into play. They tried to protect us and everything, but the kidnapping attempts and things like that became more frequent, more aggressive. Other things were happening that were pretty intense. So it just kept escalating. But so getting back to the discussion, and to answer your question, we weren't allowed to speak of it because we were warned that they would send people after us to find us. And one of the first things they would do is, since they knew my mother had relatives in Dallas, and they had children, they would send people to infiltrate the schools to find the children, to then find the parents and so forth. So it wasn't going to drop. So for that reason, you just never knew who you were talking to, who might be the perpetrator, so to speak. So
Right.
yeah, so it was scary, living like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So throughout your research for the book, like, was there anything that you discovered that was a surprise, or like, did you pretty
Yeah,
much already have an idea of everything that took place?
yeah. I didn't realize how much of an active role my father took within the home with all the armaments. I knew we had, our neighborhood was quartered off. We had guards around our house, inside our house, on our roof. We had guns stationed in every room of our home, um, those sorts of things. But we thought they were for the guards. Those were actually placed for my father to use,
Hmm.
so that whatever room he was in, if a guard wasn't in there at that time and something happened, he had the ability to protect the family from that standpoint. He had been ex-military himself in Brazil, so he was very familiar with guns, and that's what people didn't realize, was that he knew his way around guns. So he was totally capable of doing that. So he led us to believe that those were the officers' guns, to try and downplay. He tried to be honest with us, and he spoke very straightforward with us on a lot of things. He had to tell us a lot of really hard conversations that you don't normally discuss with kids. But on that in the beginning, he did try to cover up on that one. So
Yeah. Um, so, like, when you're writing a book such as Carrasco 67 that's based on, historical events and tied to your family, like, how do you balance whether or not to make it 100% factual or embellish a little bit?
that's a good question. What I did, as I was going through the process of trying to get the permission from my dad, because I respected him, and I still do tremendously. And so when I first started getting him to tell me a few things that he had never told us, I would write it down. And then, and I collected these things. And then when he allowed me to write the book, if I changed all the names in the book, I did change all the names in the book except for the name of the dog and Dan Mitrione, which I would highly suggest everybody Google him, because he was an ex FBI, and he was a CIA operative that was extremely instrumental in helping our family out. But he ended up just giving us just a whole lot of information that we ended up being able to use. He gave me specific instructions on what I couldn't put in the book, and then I wanted to give it time. So what I did with him was I said, anytime you remember anything, call me. Well, I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, because I started getting phone calls sometimes at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm still
Yeah.
working.
Diary of ideas
Right.
just
And he'd
pouring out.
go, I remembered something. And that's how the conversation would start. Not hello, not anything. I remembered something. And
Uh-huh.
here we go. I'd keep a book by the bed and I'd write it down. And so by rehashing, and I would re ask him the same things, the conversations of the phone calls between him and the terrorists. And I did that for 5 years. And by the time I got to the end, I really felt like I got the closest I could get to the original conversation that took place between him and the terrorists on the few conversations that I put in the book. Um, at the time, like I said, he wouldn't allow me to put several things in because it was very identifying. Um, and so there were some things, of course, between him and the terrorists that I had to use what I learned from my dad, and I had to use creativity there to fill in the blanks. So, there's only so much, you have to make it all be congruent at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, a cohesive read. Uh,
Right.
so, how did he feel after finally seeing the finished product? And I'm sure thumbing through it, with intent. Was he satisfied with the end result?
Yes. And he said something I never expected. He goes, I never knew you could write like this. He goes, if I knew you could write like this, I would have told you more. I, in a polite way, I could have strangled him. Because, oh, I would have loved to have put more factual things in that book, but still, even then, he reserved. He goes, "No, I wouldn't want you putting it in the book." He goes, "I'm teasing," but he knew I could write because that's all I'd ever done. Through the years, I wrote a lot, but I was waiting till my children were grown to write, and so I was already starting on another novel, and I had to put it to the side um, because. My mother approached me asking me to do this. And I will say this, I knew she was in poor health, so I felt the urgency to do it while she was here, while I could ask her questions. I was very grateful that it was published. She was able to read it before she passed, and she she asked me, she goes, um, she thanked me because she said at the time, she goes, people won't ever know who we were. She goes, but I always wanted people to know our family story and what we went through. And then she said, now go make it a movie. And I went, oh Lord, you're giving me a lot of a lot of tasks here, to a lot of hurdles to jump. But so now I did finish the first book that I had started, and it's about to go to the editors this week. So I'll have a second book called Let Me Go that will be hopefully coming out in February. So so that's that there. But
Yeah. So, how long did it take you to finish Carrasco 67?
I this one I took my time. I wanted it to be perfect, if you can you know, I will always take great care in my writing, but I will be honest, I probably will never um, be able to repeat what I did with this book, but because it was that important. So I took probably another 4 or so years, and I just rewrote and rewrote and rewrote, and once again, my dad was part of the problem because he would call and go, I remembered something. And then it was so good. Like, one was, how do you forget a kidnapping scene?
Mm-hmm.
Something that he lived through, where he's chasing through the streets, rolling over the hood of a moving car. I mean, this is happening in real life. This is a man that goes to work like you or I, and he just dove over a car trying to escape terrorists. And you think that only happens in the movies, but no, that was something he experienced. So I had to stop, go back in the book, look how I could fit that in, and I had to recreate and rewrite and work that in, and I did that. And he did that to me about 4 times. And but it was important things that needed to be in the book. So, and I appreciated it because it made it all the more. So it's everywhere that I have received reviews, that is the one thing that they have said is that they can just feel the tension, and they can, basically they're imagining being in they're being in that situation. And that's what I wanted to convey to people, is that they could understand what that nightmare was like, because unless you live something like that, you don't know. It's not natural for you to go to school with a bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
For each of you to have your own bodyguard. Me and my siblings, those sorts of things. It's not natural to have to be pulled out of school because you can no longer go to school because it's not safe. Those sorts of things. It was a lot. So, and then for the military to have to get involved, that speaks volumes there. So, and I will say this. One of the big questions that people always ask, well, why didn't you just leave? Well, back in the 60s, they didn't do like they do now. You couldn't do little emergency dictates and write papers and just get somebody out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that moment, all our passports had just happened to have expired, and we weren't planning to travel at that moment, so my dad hadn't sent it off to get them renewed. So we were sitting ducks, and so it took about 4 months before we got our paperwork in order. So we had lived that way until we could get out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the issue there. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how did you balance the personal and political aspects of the story?
In what way? I mean,
Because I obviously your father your mother and your father are going to have a different perspective versus trying to tell the story based on the time itself, as far as the way like the government and the military would function. So, like, how did you balance that?
Well, one of the things he tried to explain to us was that these men originally had come together to try and help the poor, and that they somehow they changed and they were making bad decisions, and that's kind of how he put it. And in reality, this leftist group they have roots all the way back to Che Guevara type stuff back in Bolivia, and they got together and they were looking out for the underdog. There was a lot of climate, a lot of problems. The After World War II, the meat packing industry, they were all closing. There wasn't a way to earn money, those sorts of things. So, and they were very anti foreigners coming in, because they looked at it as they were taking the jobs that the locals could get. So that ended up being something that it started exuding a lot of hatred, a lot of inciting these groups, and then they started hitting up a lot of these college kids that were very, insightful, so to speak, and they would court them. And so little by little, they started getting college kids from all walks of life, and that were going to be doctors, lawyers, everything from all. And so then over time, they infiltrated all types of businesses, and that's how they started becoming, well, they became corrupt, and then they started, embezzling from different businesses to earn money for their cause in that manner. There's just a whole lot more to it, but that was a fraction of it. So it was a shame, because that country was absolutely a wonderful place to live, and the people are just beautiful human beings, and still are. But unfortunately, there's always a few everywhere that can ruin things. So.
Yeah.
Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774, or in Durham at 919-484-8338, or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
All right, so you mentioned that one of your mother's final wishes was to adapt Carrasco 67 into a film. What elements of the story would you most want to see preserved? And then, did she mention who she wanted to play her?
No, she didn't, but she did say make sure she had red hair.
Uh-huh.
Because my mother had flaming red hair, natural.
Right.
And so it would have to be somebody that had red hair. My parents were, they were that power couple. And everywhere they went, people just were naturally drawn to them. They were extremely out of the norm. They were very, very much in love. To the day she died, they were just absolutely, totally in love. And he was extremely intelligent. He exceeded heights in his career that at early ages that most people never achieved that young. And people just were drawn to him and liked him. And so in social circles, you know, they were mover and shakers, but without trying to be. You know, they just liked people and people liked them. And but they were not they weren't partiers or that type. You know, they were very clean cut, just good as gold people. And so, but they were very elegant. And so my thing, it would have to be two people that just exuded, you know, a classiness to them. That would be something that I would like. But my dad was the type of man that was the ultimate gentleman, but yet he could command power at the same time. You know what I mean? He's just people just loved him at you know, wherever he worked. He was extremely respectful to his employees, and boy, he took care of them too. That's all I can say. I mean, they were out of the norm. I mean, and they always put their family first, and we kids, his children, we always knew we were their first priority. And that feels good growing up in a situation like that.
Right. What is the main takeaway that you hope readers get from reading Carrasco 67?
I guess is to never give up on your own courage, and to have faith on those that are trying to help you, and to be grateful for those that are helping you.
Right.
Dan Mitrione put himself out there to help us, and he was the one that first of all started before the police got involved and were helping watch our home and things like that. He provided guns for my dad and things like that, you know, he taught him how to watch and look out at street corners, and how to look for people, how to you know, how to screen, you know, your visage, and to be able to pick out somebody that's out of the ordinary, you know, that you would something that someone that's in that field would know to do, that's not a normal everyday person wouldn't do, and to protect himself. And within the year after we escaped, he was murdered by the Tupamaros, and that always saddened us. But yeah, that was sad.
Okay. All right. So I know you mentioned that you have another book that you plan to release real soon.
Yes.
What's next besides that, and what other historical or personal stories are you looking to tackle in the future?
Um, I do like historical books. At this point, I haven't quite made up my mind. I do like to write things with a suspense element in them. That seems to be where I will remain, but it will always have some sort of history background in it, of some sort. Uh, I probably, one of the things I would like to do is write a book that has to do with Brazil, being that I I have lived in many countries, but I was born there, lived predominantly there, and uh, so I think that is probably going to be my next thing, is to write something with a background from somewhere in Brazil, and pick up on that.
Hmm.
So maybe Rio.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that place. Unfortunately, it's got a little bit of a high crime going on right now. Maybe that would be a good background on that. So,
Uh huh.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what's something about you that people would find most surprising?
Um, Probably that uh, that I speak several languages. That I didn't grow up in the United States. Um, that sort of thing. And um, I, I I don't know. Pretty much that. I mean,
Yeah.
I just, I'm simple in the sense, I'm very, I definitely am very careful with people I meet, and I'm very careful. I keep my circle small, and I'm careful with my circle,
Hmm.
and I find that comforting, and I think that stems from what I went through in my childhood,
Right.
um, and you it's a trust factor too.
It's wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's you just don't know nowadays how things are. So that's one thing I try to do, is I try to figure out people. That's one thing I've always had. I guess I do have one thing. I am manically curious about people
Right.
and how they tick, and people, many times people think, oh, you're being nosy. That's not it. I just like the human story, and I like knowing not who did what to what. It's what they experience, what they're living, where, what made them the person they are, that sort of thing, and
Uh-huh.
what trials, what experiences they've had to overcome, those sorts of things. That intrigues me, and I do have one bombshell story that I am trying to get a friend of mine to allow me to write, but it'll probably be years down the road before she'll allow me to write it, um, because of certain circumstances. But it is a story that would blow your mind. It is. If you think my family story was insane, this one would knock your socks off. It's not about terrorism, but it is. It was absolutely insane what she lived through. So I'm so anxious to write it, and I keep bringing it up, and she keeps knocking me down, going, "My kids are still around."
Right. Uh-oh. Well, we all have a past.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I neglected to ask you early on in the interview, because you mentioned how how you waited until your kids grew up to start writing and becoming an author. What were you doing before that? And just talk about that transition to like
Oh,
putting your passion to bring your passion to life.
yeah. Um, One, I worked in the medical field for a very, very, very long time, and then I decided after about close to 25 years of that, I was ready to do something else. So I went to work for a school district, and I was only going to work there for a little bit while I looked for what I wanted to do. And then I discovered summers off, and I was hooked. And then I decided, you know what? Less than half of my income, that's okay. So that allowed me to start writing. So I started writing Carrasco during that time, and that's when it all started, was during that time. And then I finished and got that going, got it published right after my last child moved out and finished college and that sort of thing. So but yeah, I'm one of those that I will plow through and I give it up my all. When I do something, my undivided attention is there. So my parents made us their priority, and my children were going to be my priority. And so I knew how I was when I tried to write, and I realized, I can't, because I would be neglecting them. So I knew I had to wait. So I waited, and now I'm having fun, so it works,
Right.
So it's,
Yeah.
I like it, and I've you actually helped me make up my mind. I'm going to write something about Brazil next. So there you go. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So, Elaine, where can we find Carrasco 67 online, and then where can we find you on social media?
Okay. Carrasco is on Amazon, and my website is ElaineBrown.com. I do have the Elaine Broun author on Facebook. So, and I have a lot of TikTok videos out on the book that are pretty cool, I have to say. So, I'm on LinkedIn, all those things. And right now I'm working with Tracy Lamoury, and she's working on a few things with me, and we're going to start getting some things in order, and hopefully within the next year we'll start pitching this book, and see where we can go, and maybe it'll get to film in the near future, and we'll see how that goes.
All right.
I've
All
had
right.
a few nibbles, but
Uh-huh.
I had one producer that, bless his heart, he was real honest with me after he looked at it intently, but he realized his production team, he goes, you need a much larger production team for this kind of a story. And he goes, and I'm not there yet. So, but he said, keep me in mind
Right.
in case you haven't gone there yet. And by the time, if he's built up, so that I was honored by that, and he's been a great friend. So I really appreciated that. So.
Yeah. All right. So, Elaine, it's been fun.
It has been.
I'm gonna have to let you go before you find out what makes me tick. All right, so yeah, like I say, it was fun. Carrasco 67, get it on Amazon. Support all of her work. She has more coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
Visit her on social media. And for Stop, Look, and Listen, I'm your host, LaTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace and blessings.